Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Inside Florida Politics podcast powered by the USA Today Florida Network. Well, Florida was the scene of what state and U.S. authorities say was the largest capture of undocumented immigrants ever, in which they also claimed will serve as a model for federal state sweeps of this kind going forward. President Donald Trump begins his second 100 days with another stay at Mar-a-Lago. And a brewing mano-a-mano face-off between Governor Ron DeSantis and Republican leaders in the legislature over a sales tax cut does not bode well for the looming special session. Hi, everybody. I'm Antonio Fins, your host for the Inside Florida Politics podcast. And these are three of the topics I'll be discussing with my USA Today Florida Network colleagues, Goñi-Lessan and John Kennedy. All right, guys, welcome back. Let's kick off with Operation Tidal Wave. This was a multi-agency mission that arrested more than 1,100 undocumented immigrants last month. 2/3 of them, ICE and DeSantis claimed, had criminal records, which means that 1/3, or close to 400, did not. Anna, you've been covering the so-called 287G program that was the fulcrum of Tidal Wave. What's the outcome here?
So a couple things. Some people were arrested. They did have criminal records. You know, there was that big press conference last week with Governor Ron DeSantis standing in front of a lot of law enforcement. They specifically pointed out a couple of people who had criminal records. But what we're finding is there were people who did not have criminal records who were removed in this Operation Tidal Wave. And it's kind of all over the place, right? We have mothers, we have children who were citizens, who went with their mothers, right, who were undocumented. We have people who have been here for decades, who work in construction, lawn care, who were taken. It's in the first 4 days, I think they touted about over 780 arrests, and then total, I think it was over 1,000. Like you said, but the people the people who were taken, who were detained, their stories vary wildly from each other.
Well, this is a key point here. So let's drill down a little bit, because I was at the press conference, and ICE Deputy Director Madison Sheehan began by saying that this effort was to go after the quote unquote the bad guys. We've been hearing for months. We're only going after the bad guys. That this is not, the person who's just trying to, seeking in the American dream, and their cases being still before a judge or in some sort of disposition still to be resolved. That this is about bad guys. But then when we started asking, well, what about the other third? Then Sheehan came back and said, well, anybody who's in the country illegally, meaning undocumented, is a criminal, and therefore they're going after them, which then kind of confirms what you were just saying, that this is not just about people who have a violent past or could be a threat to the safety and security of people living in the United States, but also going after people that mow your lawns and take care of your elderly grandparents. So and we're starting to see that in some of the polls around the country, people who have even supported Mr. Trump and voted for him largely on the immigration issue, now starting to voice concerns that maybe they're going too far with this. What are you hearing, Anna?
Well, in the beginning, I think, remember, special session started in January, February, and they talked about these immigration bills. These state immigration bills would be cracking down on criminal immigrants who are here illegally, right? And, we asked point blank, is entering the country illegally or staying here without proper documentation, does that constitute as being a criminal? And we didn't really get an answer. We were told, ICE doesn't target those people. I was told by a sheriff who's now on the State Immigration Enforcement Council that, ICE doesn't target the single mom who worked 3 jobs and whatever. But that's not what we're seeing right now. That's what we're seeing is a shift that we've seen gradually. We've seen it gradually, but not that gradually, because I guess it's only May, so it only took like a couple months. So maybe I take that back. but they've shifted they've shifted their perspective on what makes someone a criminal and what doesn't. Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, because we've also in Palm Beach County, the home of President Trump, where the Palm Beach County Sheriff has actually been going to groups, civic groups, the chambers of commerce, some of the meeting with leaders in the Latino and Hispanic community, reassuring them that he is only going after bad guys, but Palm Beach County is part of this 287G program. And tell us, the 287G program, when you sign up to that, who gives the orders? As a local law enforcement agency that is part of 287G, do they take orders from ICE, or do they have free will here to say, no, we're not going to be part of this operation? How much more do we know about 287G and what the duties and obligations are?
I would say to that, Antonio, the laws that were passed earlier this year require law enforcement, require elected officials, require municipalities to comply with ICE and to comply with immigration enforcement. If you don't, there are consequences. That is enough, I think, to kind of show where maybe local law enforcement is right now. I don't know if they could. I don't know if a sheriff could say, I'm not going to do that. I mean, they could, but we've seen before what happens when someone says no to the DeSantis administration. They're removed.
Okay, John, you mentioned earlier, Anna, you mentioned that special session that took place in January. John, you covered that, and you were involved in some of the coverage of that. What actually was the goal there? Was this part and parcel, or are we seeing deviation? What can you tell us?
Well, I think there was a general sketchiness from Florida Republican leaders when it came to what is considered a criminal, when we were asking those questions about, is somebody here in this country undocumented that entered illegally, that in and of itself, I guess, is a crime. Are those the people you're going to go after now? That kind of opens a big door. And the legislative leaders were reluctant to address that. They tried to, kind of bob and weave around that question, as Anna pointed out, with some kind of, generalities about how ICE would be sort of the ones that would be determining and following ICE policies to go after people. So the short answer is it was sort of an unknown at that time. But there seemed to be an effort to at least paper over the idea that they were going to be going after, the guys that are here in this country working as, landscapers or anything like that. That wasn't in and of itself going to be enough for them to go after them as criminals. But sure enough, that's exactly what 287 allows them to do. And under the auspices of ICE, they are doing just that. And we've seen some communities, Rochester, New York, has been embroiled in a turmoil over this, where their local, Rochester is considered a sanctuary city, which in this state, DeSantis outlawed years ago. And but Rochester's law enforcement, with cooperation from ICE, went after some undocumented people that were living without overt felonies on their records or anything like that, and that has caused a divide within the city council in that city. So this issue that we're seeing play out kind of quietly in Florida, because there's not much pushback from municipalities, but it is kind of blowing up in other places as well.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next topic. Trump's 100. Hey, the president started his second 100 days with another sojourn to Mar-a-Lago. I was there that Saturday night when I saw him get a standing ovation from the members there and the fans that were there. But aside from well over 100 executive orders, which I think is a record, these orders on everything from timber logging to even plastic straws, the key signature items going after inflation, the tariffs, the DOGE budget cuts, seem to have had real mixed results, not to mention getting rebuffed on his plans to or calls to annex Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal. All that being said, the second 100 days may turn out to be even more pivotal than the first 100 days simply because of the tariffs. And we're hearing all kinds of different reports out there about potential shortages of some items, cost increases. At one point, Amazon was talking about even, or at least there was reporting that Amazon was going to put price differences on items, and people looked at to see how the tariffs are affecting items and so forth. In Florida, this is kind of important because of tourism and a lot of other issues, including trade with Mexico and Canada and a lot of other countries. So, John, you've been talking about how the potential economic implications and the budget implications of this. Any more resolution or any more certainty about what may be at stake here?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's still a little early. If you go on social media and look under the hashtag recession indicator, you'll see all kinds of wild speculation as to what is a sign of the recession coming. But it's still kind of hard to tell. But indeed, in Florida, if you start seeing any kind of downturn in tourism, which is the state's lifeblood, housing prices are already kind of sort of stale right now, and homes are on the market a lot longer. That's something that also flows into state tax collections. So those are all issues that have a direct effect on how the state operates and what kind of services it can provide. So we're going to start, seeing some of that if the economy indeed does cool. But the first 100 days, I guess, flooding the zone, isn't that part of Trump's strategy to have so many disparate ideas and sort of half-baked schemes in play that the media and voters can't really keep up? And whatever signs of failing that occur, whether it's the tariffs that are not immediately restoring manufacturing and they're also sending the stock market into a free fall. Well, that gets overtaken by another concept of some kind, as you pointed out, annexing Greenland or Canada, or favoring Russia over Ukraine because invaded Ukraine isn't grateful to us for having come to their aid. Then there's, cutting the deals with law firms for pro bono work so that they don't feel the wrath of his punishment for having represented people or who had legitimate legal cases against him or the administration. That's something that's effectively undermining the rule of law. It's wave after wave of deception and distraction, and that then you're seeing government services going into some level of dysfunction. While the chaos is there, it may be chaos by design. It is something that can pick off pieces of a functioning democracy to where there are even fewer people positioned to serve as a check and balance on Trump, the wannabe dictator. And maybe that wannabe dictator is not just on day one, as he once said.
Well, it's interesting. While I was there on Mar-a-Lago Saturday night, John White was also there, and on Sunday evening, Mr. Trump called for tariffs on movies being shot and filmed in other countries and being then imported into the U.S. And a day later, John Boyd was talking about, tax incentives and tax provisions to basically boost domestic film producing. That's been an issue in Florida. Florida used to be a place where there was a lot of film production. True Lies and a bunch of other movies were filmed here. Then those incentives went away. There have been efforts over the years to bring them back, not really successfully, and at least not in a large measure. So it'll be kind of interesting to see when we come around to next year, in the legislative session, what gets proposed, and do, Film Florida and then film incentives in Florida get bumped up. But even before we get to next year, we got a special session coming up, John. And I saw that the governor has dismissed the Florida House's sales tax cut ideas, and that's a potentially a bad omen for this upcoming extended session. You've reminded us that a decade ago, there was a special session that went on for 3 weeks, and it turned out to be one of the longest and costliest, certainly of this century. Could this happen again, or are we looking at a stalemate even in a special session?
Yeah, well, lawmakers are going to be back at the Capitol on Monday, May 12th, supposedly to begin committee work on putting together a state budget, which the Constitution says is the one thing that they have to do each year. But, already things are not looking good, as you pointed out, with DeSantis kind of blowing up the House and Senate's tax cut plan. But and indeed, it makes me think of a historically bad summer that the legislature and governor had exactly 10 years ago. But we'll get to the Wayback Machine in a moment, Sherman. But let's kind of first recap a little bit of where we are right now. Governor DeSantis and fellow Republicans in the legislature have been mostly feuding since January, and that began over immigration, as we were pointing out earlier. And that was kind of an awkward bid by DeSantis to try to get the legislature to do what he wanted to prepare for Trump's mass deportation plan. They eventually reached an accord, but it took 3 special sessions to get to that point. The 2-month regular session then became dysfunctional after it began in March and just sort of ended at the beginning of May. It's now in an extension that could last into early June. But now DeSantis has ridiculed the legislators' recently agreed upon idea of reducing the state's sales tax by about 0.25%. That would amount to about a $1.6 billion tax break. And that's the central part of a $2.8 billion tax cut that the House and Senate have come up with as a framework for their plan going forward. DeSantis, though, doesn't want to cut the sales tax. Instead, he wants to cut property taxes, or at least for starters, maybe get some support for his ignored idea of sending $1,000 rebate checks to homesteaded property owners around the state, and next year put something on the November ballot to permanently overhaul property taxes in Florida, maybe somehow doing away with them altogether. But for legislators to agree on the tax cut idea, that was a huge step, because they'd fought for 2 months over the size and the kind of tax breaks that they'd come up with. So when House Speaker Daniel Perez crowed about how good things come to those who wait, when he announced the so-called framework of this deal 2 hours before the legislature was scheduled to quit just last Friday night, that was a major starting point, let's say. The tax cut amount and what it cuts is key to getting going on the state budget. It's going to help legislators know how much money they'd have to spend and how much maybe local governments can expect. But with DeSantis sounding like he'd veto a sales tax cut, well, that maybe sends them back to the drawing board now, or not. Maybe they are willing to play chicken with DeSantis and see if he really would veto the sales tax break and demand something with property taxes. Cutting the sales tax is one of those rare times when Florida Democrats are on board with Republicans on this. So it's possible that they could get the 3/5 support they need to override a DeSantis veto on the tax break package. So, that may be something that they still forge ahead, despite DeSantis saying, don't do it. But that would also be a sign of a real revolution in the air against DeSantis, if that's the position the House and Senate takes. I could right now see the House maybe considering this, especially with, how, bellicose Perez has been at pushing back against DeSantis over his refusal to support the sales tax hike. He was mocking the governor for maybe being poised to veto the largest tax cut in state history. Perez is obviously enjoying putting DeSantis in an awkward position as a Republican leader, but getting the Senate on board with revolt against DeSantis may be more difficult. Senate President Ben Albritton has been silent so far on DeSantis' pushback against the tax cut. So we'll have to see what the vibe is when, lawmakers come back to the Capitol next week. They're supposed to only be here until June 6th at worst. But as you hinted at, Antonio, this is starting to look a lot like 2015 to me. That year, the Republican Senate held out in support of expanding Medicaid to serve more lower-income working Floridians than over the opposition from the House and then Governor Rick Scott. And like now, the regular session ended without a budget, and lawmakers came back for 3 weeks in June before finally agreeing to a budget, just barely in time for the start of the July 1st budget year. And Medicaid expansion, of course, never happened, with Florida now one of 10 states that has not done this mostly federally funded expansion. But the bitterness of Republican leaders in 2015 was epic and historic. The 3-week special session in June became the longest and costliest of its kind this century. And it cost taxpayers more than $650,000 extra for the overtime work of schlepping legislators and staff to Tallahassee and running an extra session. This year, to me, is starting to look like that 10 years ago. The kind of animosity that's brewing in 2015, I think we're seeing a little bit of it now. And that year, they even had to come back for a special session in August on redistricting that lasted 12 days. So that was truly a kind of lost summer for many legislators and reporters. So could we be in for another special session even after the latest extension ends June 6th? I'm thinking we could be. So Antonio, pass the sunscreen.
Yes, and the AC air conditioning bills, save up for the budget there. All right, we'll let our show end there. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, John. And I want to thank our production guru, Rob Landers, as well as all our colleagues across the USA Today Florida network who's reporting and stories and really help inform our podcast and our own reporting. And so a shout out to them as well. Thanks, and see you next time.